Welcome to another video. My name is Amsterdam Comic Geek, and recently I made a video about Marvel's Secret Wars, the 12-issue limited series from 1984, and the Daily Bugle reporting on it, as well as in the Marvel universe as is in our universe. And today I want to go back to 1984 and talk about Secret Wars a little bit more. This is the cover of the first issue of Secret Wars by artist Mike Busiek, who drew most of the series together with Bob Layton. Bob Layton did a couple of fill-ins, I believe. And what struck me is this. When you look at the original pencils for this cover by Busiek that was used in Marvel 8's number 12, you see a couple of differences. For instance, on the top part of the illustration, Mr. Fantastic and Thor are omitted in the cover that was used for Marvel Age and Secret Wars number 1. Probably because they needed room for the title. But also, which is interesting, Kitty Pryde is featured on this original design. She's on the left, above Cyclops, as you can see. And in the cover as released, she's not there because Kitty Pryde was not a part of the story. So apparently in an early draft, Kitty was part of the story and kidnapped like the other X-Men to Battleworld by the Beyonder. I like to watch these pencils because they tell you a lot about how an artist like Mike Busiek does his work. And so I'm always curious when I see stuff like that. To see the pencil work without the inks. We can zoom in a little bit. It's not that high, not a high resolution of an image, but still it looks pretty awesome, I think. I'm always fascinated to see the difference between the pencils and the published work. It's always interesting, I think. Also, what I wanted to show you today is Marvel 8's number 12. You might not know this, but Marvel printed its own fanzine back in the day. And from the 1980s until the early 1990s, every month we got a copy, an issue of Marvel Age. And I loved reading those in the past. In the small town where I lived in the Netherlands, there was one comic book shop. And it carried a lot of European comics, but it also carried some American comics. A lot of comics translated in Dutch, which made me very happy as a kid. There was a Spider-Man was translated in Dutch, and Batman, and the X-Men, and the Avengers, and the Hulk, and a series like that. But also every once in a while he had Marvel Age for sale. And I was a big Marvel fan back in the day, and I really liked buying those. This is number 12, so it's the first year of Marvel Age. It was only 25 cents, so I think it was cheaper than a regular comic. And that's because basically Marvel Age is just Marvel promoting Marvel. Most articles in the beginning were just advertisements, one would say. Later on, there were a couple of great issues. The covers were great, usually. There were interesting interviews with some of the artists and writers of series that were promoted. But also, I remember, and maybe I'll show you that in the next video, there's a special column on live action Marvel. So articles about the Incredible Hulk and the Amazing Spider-Man television series starring Nicholas Hammond. And with episodes, guides and such. And those were very interesting, I thought, back in the day. Because I've always been fascinated with live action adaptations of comic books and animation adaptations of comic books as well. But back in the day, seeing Spider-Man crawl a wall in New York in the 1970s, that was quite spectacular. That's an interesting topic for me to discuss later on as well. But for now, let's leaf through this Marvel 8, number 12. Jim Shooter was editor-in-chief back then still. He was also the writer of Secret Wars, as you know. And Jim Salicrup was the editor and design editor of Marvel 8. He was also later on, I believe, an editor of the Spider-Man line of comics. This is a digital copy, of course. I've got a couple of physical copies of Marvel Age on the shelves as well, but digital is easier for me to show you at the moment. So this is the coming attractions, the solicitations as they call them now. I see Kitty Pryde and Wolverine limited series. I remember that from back in the day. Doctor Strange number 65. What I also like is the artwork they put between the text. Most of them are taken from comics, so they're like panels, cut-out panels from real comics. For instance, this X-Men panel I remember from, I'm not sure which issue it came from, but it's a drawing by John Romita Jr., as it says, and inked by Dan Green. I really like that run. I'm a big Chris Claremont fan when it comes to the X-Men. I'm not a big fan of the current X-Men. I don't like what Jonathan Hickman is doing with the X-Men. It's not for me, but if you like it, good for you. I mean, so many tastes, so many comics. Apparently, this was the moment when Tony Stark went off the wagon. The famous Demon in a Bottle storyline by David Michelinie. I think Bob Layton was the artist on that one back in the day. But I wanted to show you this feature on Secret Wars, which was promised on the cover, The Secrets of Secret Wars, as you can see. Well, it's just a puff piece basically, telling us what the premise of the series will be and who the artists are and stuff like that. It's by Mark Lehrer, if I pronounce that correctly. What's interesting though is this is the first time people are witnessing Spider-Man's new costume, the design of Spider-Man's new costume. I believe Mike Zack was the designer of that. And it's a bit different from what it eventually became, because the spider is red instead of white. And the shape on the bottom is a bit different from what we got in the comic book later. So this is an early design. And I'm not sure if you can read it properly, but it says, Danny, are the new web shooters mechanical or organic? Organic. So that was still something they were trying to figure out, I guess, at that stage. Some more artwork. This looks great though. This is a great panel, an introduction of the villains that are participating in this story. And the next article is looking back at Marvel Age, because they had 12 issues out. So it was time to reminisce, I suppose. A great illustration of one of my favorite villains, the Hobgoblin. It's really one of my favorite villains of all time, but especially Spider-Man villain. And this is a drawing by, it's inked by Klaus Janson. You can tell the way it's inked. And I think it's John Romita Jr. doing the pencils here, the way it's drawn. It's basically a flashback to their highlights, the highlights of some of the past 12 Marvel Age issues. And there's Spider-Man popping up with another note from the editor, I suppose. How about putting an extra joint in the legs? So sometimes I see artists do the black costume. Well, it evolved, I suppose you could say. So the Venom costume, it looks different from its original design, but yeah, I find it interesting to see. This is an advertisement for Heartburn, original graphic novel by Rick Veitch. It's a pretty good story actually. I got it on the shelves. I read it last year. I bought it last year. Got a good for a good price actually. It's fun to read, and I like how they put it in black and white to distinguish it, I guess, from the other stuff, from the other artwork. And there's also a feature on Frankenstein with illustrations by Bernie Wrightson, which is of course wonderful. His illustrations were absolutely fantastic. And it's I've never read it. I've only leafed through it, and I've seen digital scans of the drawings. I've never read the whole book. I've never read Frankenstein. I did read the Marvel Comics adaptation that was published, I guess, in the 1970s and early 80s. I got a trade paperback. But in the back in the day, it was also published in Dutch, in black and white. And those comics made quite an impression on me. The creature in particular, and the sadness of his story, because it's a very sad, dramatic story. But these illustrations by Bernie Wrightson, they're very dramatic. And there's not a lot, but it's enough, I suppose. These drawings should be enough to entice you to pick up the book. And also, this made me laugh, because I totally forgot about this, that Marvel had a license for the A-Team back in the day. And these are preview of the first couple of issues. And Jim Salicrop, who's also the editor of Marvel 8, was the writer of that A-Team comic. But it had different artists. So Mary Severin was a co-plotter and penciler on the first one, but there's another name mentioned for the second issue. I was wondering if you ever read that A-Team comic, because I've never read it. I know there were a lot of licensed comics at Marvel. Most famously, of course, is Star Wars. I read a couple of those. But Elf, they had Elf and the alien from Melmac. And I remember Transformers. I think they were all published by Marvel back in the day. Well, the likenesses are pretty good, I guess, of BA. Well, you know, it's hard to do BA wrong, I suppose, because he had such distinguished features. Mr. T still has distinguished features, with his mohawk and his muscles and the way his beard and all the gold around his neck. But also Hannibal is drawn pretty good. My favorite character always was Murdoch. I also had a cap like Murdoch. So I used to pretend I was Murdoch back in school when I was a kid, when this was on the television. Let's see, what do we have more? Something about the Epic line. Jim Starlin, and notes from Nuts. So that's letters from readers. That's what I always like about single issues, and what I miss when I read a lot of trade paperbacks, and you don't have the letter columns in there, and other special stuff. So every once in a while, I like to go to the comic book shop and just buy floppies. But I'm more a trade paperback kind of guy. But it's nice to read some of the old letter columns. In the Netherlands, they had editorials of the Dutch publisher and letters from the readers. And those were always fun to read what people thought about a certain storyline or new artists on Spider-Man, for instance. Yeah. So this is Marvel 8 number 12 from back in the day. I'm a big fan of the Cartoonist Kayfabe channel. And they started with leafing through and talking about old Wizard issues. They started at number 1. And I always thought those videos were a lot of fun because Ed Piskor and Jim Rugg, who are both cartoonists, great artists with interesting books, have a lot of knowledge as fans, but also from back in the day. And sometimes when a comic is mentioned in an article of Wizard, they get a physical copy and they leaf through the physical copy. So that's a great way to go through those. So I thought I'll just open up Marvel 812 when I saw this picture somewhere. I thought, oh, this is great. Because I really like talking to you guys about comics from the past. And now there's a lot of channels out there that talk about the current situation in comic book land, which is interesting, of course, with everything that's going on and everything that has been going on in the past years. But I guess I'm more of a nostalgic kind of comic book fan. I still read a lot of current comics, but my heart for comics started to beat in the 1980s when I was a kid. It's still beating, but I have a fondness for that period of for comics, especially Marvel, but also Batman. I read a lot of Batman back in the day. So this channel is probably going to focus more on what happened in the past than what's happening now. But there are a lot of great channels that are covering what's happening now, so I don't have to add my 2 cents on those topics. But I just wanted to show you guys this. If you like this, please let me know in the comments. Did you read Marvel Age back in the day? Did you like this fanzine by Marvel itself? Or were you more like a Wizard guy? Did you like Wizard back in the day? Please let me know in the comments. And thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys at the next one. Cheers.